single comic panel can affect how a character is perceived by writers and fans for decades, and there's no better example for that than Hank Pym. Hank Pym, aka the first Ant-Man, is one of the founding members of the Avengers in the comics and has a rich history along with his partner Wasp, aka Janet Van Dyne. Hank is infamously known for a single panel where he is shown as slapping his wife, which has forever labeled him as a domestic abuser, even though the reality of the situation is very different from what's shown in the panel. Just to catch you up, in Avengers issue 213, which came out in 1981, Hank Pym, who was going by Yellow Jacket at the time, accidentally ended up striking his wife in the middle of a nervous breakdown. But that was never the intention of the panel. It was revealed in 2011 that the panel was meant to show Hank Pym having his hands up in the air in despair and frustration, but the artist who was known for creating extreme actions accidentally made it into a right cross, and that ended up giving Hank the wife beater label, even though there was never any intention to tell a story like that. Unlike so many other controversial stories and moments in comics, this one unfortunately had the bad luck of sticking around in public memory and quickly became the number one thing associated with Hank Pym. It's also worth mentioning that the whole situation is a little weird because even if the panel had been a mistake, the rest of the comic and the storyline showed Janet with a black eye and trying her best to cover it up before the Avengers eventually figured it out. The writers doubled down on the concept by having Hank go up against the Avengers and leaving the Avengers in the aftermath in a baffling story that doesn't really make any sense no matter how you look at it. But the damage was done. Hank Pym's character got enormous hate after the story, and the writers naturally decided to capitalize on it. They had Janet emerge as the hero of the story and had Janet divorce him and move on. Honestly, the only good thing that really came out of this whole thing is that it made Janet Van Dyne one of the best kick-ass heroes in the Marvel universe, even more than she already was. They did eventually have Hank understand his mistakes and apologize, and even Janet ended up forgiving him, and it was considered as a one time thing that hopefully would be completely forgotten. And in a lot of cases, it would have been, but that ended up not being the case for Hank Pym. The panel continued to haunt Hank Pym, and this has severely affected his perception, causing Hank Pym to be regarded as a cruel monster and a difficult character. And there are a few reasons for why that ended up being the case. Hank Pym is quite well known among Marvel comic fans, but he's not extremely popular. He's not a huge solo star, and he doesn't really have a lot of memorable stories. Even now, when you think of Hank Pym, there's usually he works with the Wasp, he created Ultron, and he had this whole controversy. Those are the three things that everybody thinks of when they think of Hank Pym, whether you're a fan or even if you're not. Compare that to Spider-Man, who also had a similar panel with Peter accidentally hitting Mary Jane. Everybody forgets that it even happened. Nobody cares because Spider-Man has 1,000 different storylines that are really well known, that are really popular, and nobody's going to be immediately thinking of that panel when they think of Spider-Man. And there's also another thing. There's also the fact that it wasn't entirely something people could dismiss as out of character. Hank has always been a little uptight, a little unhinged, so it wasn't really hard to assume that he had snapped and done something terrible. So I feel like that's part of why it kind of stuck around a little bit. It's hard to imagine Peter Parker doing something like that, but Hank Pym, kind of maybe. But I feel like the biggest reason why it stuck around is because it feels real. Domestic abuse is real. Hank Pym may have created a murderous robot that caused the deaths of thousands of people, but nobody's really going to relate to that. Nobody's going to care about that because nobody feels strongly about that in a real life sense. But domestic abuse, that's real and it affects people when they see a superhero do something like that. And seeing Hank Pym do something like that really tarnished people's perception of the character, especially if that was their first impression. And that usually is for a lot of new generations of superhero fans, unless they decide to take in the effort to get to know the character and dig into his history and all of that. But not everybody's going to do that. There's also the fact that Several alternate reality stories ended up leaning into this aspect, and they made Hank Pym into an actual domestic abuser, having him hit Janet so many times and showing him physically hurting Janet and taking pride in it. And this made his reputation even worse among people who weren't really able to differentiate between these versions properly. All these reasons are probably why Marvel effectively decided to make Scott Lang the main Ant-Man in the MCU and pretty much in the comics, and because they have pretty much promoted Scott Lang as the primary Ant-Man for the past 2 decades, while Hank slowly became a less popular supporting character who shows up every now and then. Now that brings us to Hank Pym's fate in the comics. After the incident, writers kind of sidelined him for a little while, but this was the 80s and eventually Hank did return to prominence. Over the past 40 years or so, he has returned to the Avengers multiple times. He was revealed to be bipolar. He helped create Avengers Academy. He helped create the AI Avengers. He helped mentor the new Ant-Man, aka Scott Lang. He was replaced by a Skrull. He managed to mend fences with Janet Van Dyne and even the rest of the Avengers. He also became the Wasp in her honor when she temporarily died. He got a long lost daughter named Nadia Van Dyne. Hell, he even merged with Ultron for a little while, going by the name Pymtron. Well, he didn't actually go by Pymtron, but that's what people kind of called it. I'm just summarizing a few random events that have happened to Hank in the past 40 years so you get the gist of everything that's been done with Hank. But at the same time, what I really want to get into is how there is always a writer here and there who takes advantage of Hank's infamous history to make a joke at his expense, and writers who really do not like that it happened to Hank and they want to do their own redemption arc for Hank. And that's the cycle the character has been stuck in. Since that's this whole controversy is the most famous thing that the character is known for, even more than the fact that he created freaking Ultron. Everybody always seems to have some opinion on how to tackle it and help Hank finally move on from the storyline. Even though that's been done at least like 3 times in the comics so far, but it's never really stuck around because everybody wants to keep doing it again and again. Truthfully, I believe the only way for Hank to ever truly move on is if nobody at Marvel acknowledges it. But at the same time, it's such a huge incident that it cannot fully be ignored, especially when the incident helped Janet Van Dyne bloom into her own person and become an excellent superhero of her own without being dependent on her husband. There's also the fact that Marvel adaptations seem comfortable skipping over Hank or turning him into a tertiary supporting character while making Scott the default Ant-Man, which only reduces his popularity even more, which reduces the effort needed to actually rehabilitate a character like this. In my opinion, Hank Pym is a character who kind of did an evil thing, but he was not an evil man. He was a man struggling with mental illness that led him to make unfortunate mistakes. Mistakes he has been rightfully condemned for multiple times, but mistakes that should not define the character forever. Hank Pym is a fantastic, complex character who deserves so much better than being known for something horrible like that. But the end of the day, for better or worse, his reputation has stuck, and it feels like the stain will never fully wash away no matter how hard Marvel tries to do it or how much his fans want it to be gone. I hope Hank Pym can get the attention he deserves one day. But even if he doesn't, we'll always have Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes Hank Pym. Probably the only time somebody respected Hank Pym in the past 40 years or so, outside of the comics. But you get the gist. Thank you for listening.